in about a minute or two.
Good afternoon, Lisa. Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the MMA Smarties Unplugged virtual panel discussion and creative effectiveness. Today we're focusing on media, specifically around some of the research the MMA has been doing in the area of media. My name is Louisa Mazinta. I was the judge chair for the Smarties this year, and I'm delighted to sort of be navigating you through the day. I'd like to kick off by introducing Enver Groenewald, who's the CEO of MSA chair.
Thanks very much, Louisa. You were breaking up there. I'm not sure if it's your side, but if people can just let me know if they're not hearing me clearly or seeing me. So first, very, very warm welcome to all the attendees on this webinar, as well as the distinguished guest speakers and panelists that are going to be presenting to you. As you know, this Smarties Unplugged webinar series follows on from our Smarties 2020 Business as Usual series, and the theme for all the webinars center around the 4 Smarties categories that some of you would have judged on, namely marketing, media, tech, and business unusual. So today we're going to deal with what's known as the movable middle. And let me first thank Standard Bank for generously sponsoring this webinar. Thank you so much, Sagren, for your generosity and your continued interest in pushing the envelope around thought leadership and development education in our industry. I don't think that it's any surprise to anybody on this webinar that COVID-19 has had severe economic impact on marketers and the way brands are built, and that digital marketing has ushered in an obsession with immediate measures and short-term focus. And that impacts, of course, on the ability to justify how you allocate your marketing rands in terms of building brands over the long term. And that's an ever-present tension, I think, is the pressure on businesses to deliver short-term results under tight economic conditions at the expense of taking a long-term view on how the brand needs to continuously be built and maintained in the hearts and minds of its consumers. Now, even when marketers assess advertising in terms of its ability to lift brand KPIs and potentially sales, there's a view that there's really no solid evidence of the performance values of these metrics over time. And another important observation is that most media plans aim to maximize campaign reach. But the question that we have to ask is whether a plan that is designed to maximize sales uplift and outcomes is better there for brands than the long-term view of creating saliency and brand equity. So the role of targeting and which approach better serves the brand in the short or the long term is a key question that will form the focus of the webinar today. I suppose we want to be at a place where we understand clearly whether it is going to be a situation of focusing on short-term gains from a sales uplift or building brand saliency and equity over the long term. So one or the other, or can you do both at the same time? And I think that that is the eternal question that marketers are confronted with. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to Joel Rubinson, who is an MBA graduate and former Chief Research Officer at the Advertising Research Foundation, who's going to provide some insights on the benefits of outcomes-based marketing 2.0. And he's going to explain how marketers can achieve profitable growth by targeting consumers in the movable middle. And then to explore what the right mix of performance and brand marketing and channel spend delivers in terms of delivering the best blend for short and long-term growth. We're going to ask Louisa to moderate a roundtable debate with some very, very influential and distinguished panelists in the industry, namely Sagrin Patha, who is the Executive Head Platforms and Channel Management for Media at Standard Bank South Africa. Welcome, Sagrin. Zia Namoya, who is the CEO of Mindshare South Africa. Angelique Lynn, who is the Marketing Director at Order Trader. Bruno Bertrand, who is the Digital Commerce and Marketing Director at Estee Lauder Companies in South Africa. And last but certainly not least, Sohail Lombardo, who is the Marketing Director for KFC in South Africa. Welcome to all the panelists and to Joel as well. Now, the debate that's going to form part of this roundtable discussion, moderated by Louisa, is going to explore, amongst others, how marketers rose above the challenges of 2020 and the lessons that they've learned. How 2020 has influenced your strategies as marketers for 2021. What will the focus for this year be in driving business growth? How local businesses adapted to the challenges of last year and which of these stood out at the Smarties? And then perhaps finally, what are the brand's international counterparts doing to embrace innovation in digital marketing during these challenging times? So we're in for a very exciting and enlightening session on this webinar. I'm looking forward to joining you in taking out some key learnings that can be applied in the business that I run at Ogilvy and to enhance my ability as a marketer. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Joel and wish everybody to Louisa, my apologies, Louisa, and wish everybody a very, very effective and engaging webinar. Thanks very much, and thank you, Louisa.
Thanks, Enver. Just a slight tweak. We're going to leave Joel till the very last and kick off immediately with a presentation by Zia.
Hi, Louisa. I'm not sure if it's me, but I could
view of what is happening in
Louisa. We're losing you, so I'm a bit concerned that we're not going to be hearing you clearly throughout the webinar. So maybe you can just go off video, perhaps, which will help with internet reception. All right?
Okay, sorry. Give me a sec. Okay, everybody. So is that better? Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, for
Great.
now.
Better, much better.
Okay, I'm really hoping that the Wi-Fi gods are with me for the rest of the session. I'd like to just first share a little bit of a background to this particular focus area for the Smarties, which we're very happy that our sponsor, the Standard Bank, have done us to.
Not sure if it's just me still, but can everybody hear Louisa still? Or no?
No, Louisa's still breaking up.
Pacific South Africa, everything is in our mobile, whether or not you hailing.
Is it not coming through? Well, guys.
No, Louisa.
Shall I try?
Oh,
shall I?
Okay.
Shall I my bit, Louisa? Might be easier.
Yes, yeah. I think let's jump into your presentation. I'll just let me know if you need me to change slides.
Yeah, I'll just do that. Cool. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, feels like a bit like a deja vu when some of us were in a room judging this category with a lot of debate. Actually, at one point, I was feeling so nerve-wracking for future award categories because of the way that we were so strict and so critical of everybody. And I think even was it John from Pick and Pay was just saying he wishes like there was no one put his campaigns in because of the way we were so critical. But I think that is essentially it. This pandemic in a way has really brought us into different ways on our knees in many ways, but sometimes it's really pushed other areas for us to really think literally outside of that box. So, but yeah, just next slide, please, Louisa. I think my presentation, elements of it, some of it you already know and see, etc. But, I think sometimes you have to sort of look back in order to make sure when you're looking forward that you're doing the right thing, especially when there's a bit of nervousness about taking that real leap of faith. These slides are very much, if you can remember that far, from Jan in a year of insights, if you like, all sorts of things that happen globally. I mean, we're living in South Africa, so we all know what happened in our own country, which was quite unique. But let's look at what happened in other countries in many ways over those years when we were dealing with a global pandemic itself. In April, you could see that last bit is slightly more media relevant, if you like, when you see the Netflix and the streaming domination come through. For me, that's quite an important point when we come to the South Africa lens of this presentation, because we start very much seeing that technically some advanced markets work with a trend first, and we tend to get it a little bit last, but actually we got it reasonably quick because I guess media consumption in its way was also here because the pandemic in a way forced it. Next slide, please, Louisa. So a lot of things also happened again from May to August. We saw a lot of disruption in the US. We really saw a lot of things about how the pandemic affected remote working, and that was really, in a way, disruptive in its right, because we all got together with this tech, or not, basically, sometimes depending on which bandwidth provider you're on. But I think what was interesting is that our whole life really shook away, and I think that's really most important. That sometimes I sat in brainstorms and we think we are also customers, basically, either way. We are also consumers, although we're in this sort of marketing media space. Sometimes we think we know what's right, but what's happened to ourselves? And I think that's really important to sort of bear in mind when we sort of see trends like this, basically. Next slide, please. Yeah, and from September to December, and this is all last year still, basically, I think it was really interesting to see this whole TikTok Oracle deal, from that president, you might remember, in that case where there was also a platform domination that was still going on when there was a pandemic, which I think was really bonkers still. And then luckily, depending on which side you're on, I do think, the US, one of the great sort of advanced markets, really puts a better person in place that can just govern things a lot better. When sometimes I see, markets like US, UK sort of in trouble, we tend to sort of catch a cold, as it were, from emerging markets because of Forex exchange and currency, etc. So we all want to buy and remain local, but sometimes when importing it isn't going to, or even exporting isn't going to play in our favor. These are things that really matter to us, and as consumers, that's what we need to do as well. So yeah, next slide, please. So that was just a real roundup in last year, which some of us really want to forget. But it's quite interesting when those trends distill down into a market like South Africa, what it really does to us, economy, all the way down to a share of wallet. But now getting more interestingly, I want to say into the sort of media piece itself. I was talking a bit earlier about how the streaming side really really propelled, basically. And it's really an important point, really, about where the first wave of the lockdown in South Africa, we actually saw lots more TV viewership, linear or streaming. And we actually saw a rise, and I know I'm not talking entirely to this slide here, but a rise to national radio. And I think it naturally links in with newsworthy updates, especially with the broad market that we have in this country as well. And you're also boxed inside, so you're not listening to radio in your car anymore. And I'm talking in the early phase one of lockdown in SA. So we call it the rise of legit VOD, video on demand. So this is literally, if it wasn't a trend before that most media decks you might have seen from agencies and companies alike, this is really where it propelled from the moment we saw our own lockdown. So this is our stats from South Africa as well. Next slide, please, Louisa. And just what we called digital extensions. This is also the rise on Showmax. So at a local level, where we've seen streaming really play a role, because it's not just been the sort of Netflix of the world, but it's also our local broadcasters not just waiting and really taking a big leap and moving forward with that. So this really mirrors that global trend insight that I was talking about earlier. Next slide, please. And yeah, so once again, at a local level, with Netflix also reflecting what Showmax and all streaming were doing, this also just gives a real, I want to say, call it reassurance, but really a real dominance in streaming itself, whichever subscriber base you want to be in. So it does mean what we call digital extension is anything that I guess was, should we call it, above the line? So whether it's TV, print, radio, and I'm going to talk a little bit on print later on as well, that actually the extension of it, if a broadcaster or a media owner has gone and made way for an incremental platform, such as a TV streaming service, which is not just relying on linear, then we are in a winning space, because also the consumer has moved towards that habit as well. So it doesn't make sense to just not progress, basically. But that's my soapbox with the SABC a lot. Anyway, we'll talk about them another time. But yeah, really, once again, you just move into now applying all of those three guys together. You just see our local Netflix sort of graph really peaking from February moving forward as well. So it just gives a real sense that streaming is here to stay. And actually, more interestingly, I've seen the broadcasters coming with, shall we call it, traditional digital advertising formats being introduced in streaming now as well. Pause screening, which is like a really great way of making sure your big 60-inch screen has got either a KFC box ad on it to sort of buy, or you've got a loan that you prefer to buy. Sorry, I'm just plugging clients here. But yeah, you know, so, but it's a really nice way of having a much bigger screen now to actually put your ads on. So it really is something quite important to look at. Next slide, please. Yeah, and this was a two at the bottom, a client disclaimer, clients of Mindshare here. And I think one of the strategists wanted to kind of look at something about what are the publishers that are actually driving some of the traffic to these, you know, a very short sample of website traffic. So where did the people come from when they were going to these landing sites at the end of the day? And the common theme that we saw was actually lots and lots of TV, moving and streaming sort of area. And also locally, you had shopping and you had news, and you also had sort of the classic search area. But I guess what the key takeout for me is that whilst we are looking for services or products, where it seems that the most of the universe is actually, well, local universe was on streaming sites in a very captive audience sort of space. So it was interesting to see that the redirection of some of these website traffic, where it originated from, making the point of the earlier few slides of how streaming is becoming such a really big area to be there first, if you like, before wanting them to be redirected. Next slide, please. So yeah, I think at the same time, we sort of live also in a market that some of this can be, shall we say, short-circuited, basically. So what we then also need to make sure that whilst content is being provided sometimes freely, not freely either, based on subscription, what do we do when actually we see this really, really buoyant space becoming pirated, I guess, in many ways, or finding that people, consumers are finding really innovative shortcuts / illegal shortcuts to sort of basically avoid this. And that's really quite a key point for us, because if we're saying that a lot of people are in entertainment, movie streaming, let's spend a lot of paid media over there. Let's target lots of people in apps, etc. over there. But at the same time, there's also a trend that we need to be cognizant about, how people are also bypassing paid for subscriptions on streaming. So it's really a way that sometimes, like even ad blocking, that is a conscious decision that you make, that you don't want to see ads and you pay for it, etc. But in this space, we see such a rise in streaming, and have been, that actually we really need to sort of be cognizant about how we make sure we take into account the short circuiting of this. Next slide, please. And yes, these are literally slides of, if you look at the famous sort of sites like Kick-Ass Torrents and Pirate Bay, the next slide all talk about how actually, if I put the slides that I did earlier, 4 or 5 slides that showed the streaming services going up, and I married the bypassing ones together, you'll actually see sometimes of the graphs outstripping our paid subscribers. So if I was your media strategist and I said, right, put all money on streaming, that's it, everything, that's it, we would actually not really get the universe that we probably projected, that we initially projected, sorry, because these sort of numbers and these sort of, should we call it, steps are being taken by consumers to outstrip the streaming one. Then they wouldn't have seen our ads, basically. So it's something that we've got to take into account, that we've got to look at the lens and say, yep, streaming's on the rise, fantastic. But what are other things that are happening in that space, where I guess a digital strategist should really dig deeper in that space to make sure your universe, streaming universe, is unique, I guess is what I'm saying. So moving quickly from streaming to a little bit of this, we spoke about a report that was called This Year, Next Year. It's an investment report, Group M agencies sort of present twice a year, actually, in 33 markets. And what we basically look at is a little bit in the crystal ball in South Africa, and we kind of say, right, what is going to happen from a trends perspective for investment by medium, as well as obviously things around digital extensions. And this is what I call what I was saying earlier. So anyone that used to do the left-hand side is obviously going to do the right-hand side. And these are the ones that have managed to stay in business. We all know the big, large publishing houses that sadly closed down, etc. But we've seen a real quick rise of these, like I say, these extensions that move into the online space without closing down the ATL version, by the way, I must admit. So what this provides is incremental reach, really. Next slide, please. And yeah, just on that segue, so what we're seeing here, left to right, is total newspapers in its hardcore format that we know it. And then you see the websites. So what we're talking about here is while print has had a really tough time, they've really pivoted, famous word of 2020, and basically added on another universe onto their site. So what's great here, a bit like how 5, 6, 8 years ago, digital planners and digital strategists were sort of advised book TV or plan TV and digital at the same time. In order to get incremental reach. So this is a nice way that we've seen how good, I want to say, print titles have come on. It's not huge incremental reaches, but I guess it's just trying to keep the ethos of an editorial, a local publisher as well in business by providing that, or they could have just sat and just keep on giving out paper. But in this time, we really see how clients can really benefit from this as well, especially with native content, which I think is a really important thing. Yeah, moving on, I think we've seen brands, you sort of hopefully can see that I'm walking throughout the year briefly, but, it really has shown a lot of brands in this country, globally, etc., that anyone that did something, it wasn't really to switch the lights off, but what they did do in terms of any branding was actually to show that they cared about our consumer. And on left to right shows a bit of snapshots of consumer bubbles that basically talk about what they felt and how they feel about a particular brand, and what do they want them to focus on, what in a pandemic, basically. And the top of that chart, if you like, on the left-hand side, 56% of that was, as a brand, please tell me that you are supporting people during the COVID-19 space. We saw lots and lots of relief, purpose, care type advertising. And I think that largely a lot of great marketers took to the principle of not going dark during a pandemic, during a recession, or any of those sort of global crises, but how do they still maintain top of mind in a meaningful way and not just force a product down the line? So this was sort of like the narratives of how this came out. Next slide, please. And I think with that the purpose piece came out so much through a lot of like the summer activation that happened, and I think it really just fueled consumers, well, not even consumers, people. It really just fueled a lot of this, even more so what was happening in the world, etc. So I think it didn't go wasted if you were just doing a brand purpose type campaign, basically. Next slide.
TikTok is known more for its viral dances than
because
for
of
politics.
time, because I'll show that. So with Bayers' permission, this is the Pet Cares campaign. So they didn't do any sort of retail marketing ads with us, but so this
to wish the world well. Make a special get well message. Then ask an adult to take a photo and post it on their Facebook or Instagram with the hashtag PepCares.
Over 3,000 kids responded.
The children of South Africa wish everyone in the world well. Please take care. Have hope. We are praying for everyone.
I hope you get well soon. We are united.
Today. I'm so excited to bake today. We're going to make flapjacks. Flapjacks. First, you're going to need some milk. Next, you're going to need an egg. Oops. Today we're going to make a card for somebody that's feeling sick. Now first we fold the paper in half. Now we take the plaster and put it in the middle of the page. So you're going to take some eyes and set them with some glue. It's time to get active with us. I'm going to show you some easy exercises to do at home. First, we're going to do sergeants. Next, we're going to do running on your spot with your hands like this.
Brilliant, right? You know, just that whole sense of getting your brand still out there, but really for purposeful and meaningful way. Very, very rare it can be done properly. So things like that just really was heartwarming. So without having to switch the lights on, it just worked very well. And I think brands that did a lot of that still will continue to do well. In the last few bits here, we're just talking about in exchange, and I know we've talked in this country a lot about value exchange. Give me data and I'll do something about it. But in these times, we've just seen a lot more sort of requirement, I guess, from the left-hand side to the right-hand side. Left is literally just saying to a sample of people, what would you do, or what would you do if you did give sort of personal data as a value exchange? And they literally would want sort of in advertising, privacy, or any of those good things. And on the right-hand side, you just talk about who are the most privacy conscious. And we are going to come to that in probably future MMA webinars where we talk about cookieless world, etc. But this is where you do a good value exchange for the data portion of it and not just the advertising side to make you feel warm. Next slide, please. Yeah, it's a busy slide. I know you, hopefully when we send it, post this, very happy for everybody to have this. But on that, where, just if you can just maybe zoom on where we put the pinkish boxes, which hopefully sort of reflect the Africa portion. So it's no disillusion, mobile has really carried on growing, in my opinion, and where it's growing even further. And the handset device, you know, if it needed more convincing, is now also what type of audiences as well. You know, there's this probable stigma, or if not perception, that it's only designed for the youth. It really isn't. We've got Gen X and boomers in this space. So what type of content or targeting can we also allow for that broader type of audience as well in South Africa / Africa? Next slide, please. These are the last couple of slides now that we took literally wrap up around, you know, the evolution as it were, basically. And it's become a little bit of the storefront. We've spoken and talked a lot about e-commerce boom, etc. And I think I saw a Take-A-Lot TV ad, if not a banking ad, I can't remember which one, that was trying to show reassurance about shopping online on a TV ad. And I thought that was I remember 3 years ago when I came here, I was asking about what's the e-commerce landscape, etc. And everybody's like, no, not really a thing. It's more designed for bulky things. And they were describing just bikes are only ordered online for some reason. But no, everything was like, I need to go and buy it. I need to go and touch it. I need to feel it, because there was a trust issue. But now, I mean, it exploded big time, which we saw some stats before. So next slide, please. Is the image, I think the image might have cropped off, but oh, there we go, perfect, thanks. The shoppable ads, we're seeing a real rise in that in strategies right now, or strategy requests, I want to say. The Shopify function on Facebook is fantastic with the small businesses, but even more and more, we're seeing video content, shall we call it, platform creators, who are coming to us to help design ads, video ads, which have what they call hotspots, which are then becoming transactional. So meaning you can buy and transact and shop within the moving video itself, which I think is fantastic, that whilst there's always been a little bit of a lag of video, I want to say, advertising in this market because of data issues, whilst we're now getting good platforms that are 0 rated, and we have Facebook lights, etc., we can now, actually push video itself as a format even further to delight, basically. Now with that rise, how about we make it transactional? So to marry the whole e-commerce trend as well. So really looking forward to that taking on. And I think the next few slides should be the end, I hope. Oh, the examples of that. Next slide, please. And next slide. So I think there's a couple of bullet points here, but you can click on all of them for me, Louisa, because there's, I guess for me, I don't know if it's because we've spoken a lot about these key points, if you like, a lot with people, with clients, media partners, and peers alike, that sometimes it can be a little bit it's sort of a bit too tired, I guess. But it's almost like a reminder, basically, like what really happened, to take into account what we really need to do moving forward. One of my bosses said to me, actually, it would be really great if a lot of the trends as a company, what we've managed to do together, just internally, not even externally now, we can keep. Things like we can say good morning to 93 people in one go on Teams, in one go, from Cape Town, Durban, and our Joburg office every morning. Sometimes I even know who's got up earlier than me, basically. So it would be nice to really try and keep that human trend moving on. But for me, if I had to sort of cherry pick the ones that really need evolving and we'll see future growth, point 4 and 5. I think the point 4 is as big as it's going to be. Global companies will really put this down into this market. And I think our consumers will also start becoming more conscious and more green, dare I say. So the more purposeful we are and less, I want to say, aggressive about our brand mission, then it will really come through. And yes, the last bit about data privacy. I don't think we're entirely there yet as a market, but again, being prepared for it before it arrives is actually one thing, because we're saying to everybody, please advertise in a recession, please advertise when there's a blackout, etc. But what if people don't want to opt into things anymore? What if they don't want you to send anything to them? So how do we still make sure they are aware of what we're about to do as a brand? So for me, that's really ones that we've got to find a way that we find a decent value exchange to that consumer. But yeah, a little run through of last year and some bits and pieces of media evolutions, as it were. We're very happy to share this as it's not confidential, whatever, anyway. But thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Zia. I just think you've highlighted, I'm gonna leave my video off. You've highlighted so many interesting trends, and I'd love to open it up to the floor Specifically, the trend lines are consistent across all of the channels and all the media that you spoke about. And I know Professor Scott Galloway from New York Stern School of Business talks about the great acceleration that COVID has literally introduced. You know, we're seeing a decade of growth and change just in a matter of months. And I'd love to ask Suhail, with your experience in an industry, in a category that's been challenged by COVID and by the shutting down of stores, and yet this increased demand, are you experiencing it from a physical retail perspective?
Thanks, Louisa. Yeah, I mean, you know, we have the, you know, when this crisis hit, we have the benefit of being part of a global system, right? We have 25,000 restaurants literally across the entire planet. And when the crisis initially hit, the first place we looked at was China, right? Because China experienced everything that we experienced but a few months earlier. And I think the immediate and obvious insight that was coming out was this idea of the great and permanent habit shift. You know, I mean, humans are notoriously habit driven. We generally eat at the same places. We order, you know, the same food. Sometimes we even sit at the same tables. So I think when something like this happens, though, all bets are off. I think it's an opportunity where you literally form new habits and often permanently. And we've seen that. So from our perspective, we've seen a shift to delivery. We've seen a shift to pickup. So, you know, there are less people that are going physically into a restaurant and actually preferring to sit in a drive-through. And I think for us, that was expected. But we have, to be honest with you, this idea of habits is something that I think we need to keep in mind, because we're actually seeing a shift back. So it's quite interesting that, you know, in a South African context, yes, delivery, you know, ordering on the app, all those things are picked up. But after a while, they're starting to sort of revert back to your old habits. So it's been a really interesting space for us from that perspective. And I'm not sure if Louisa.
Sorry, thanks. Sorry, my I'm here. Thank you. Great insight. Bruno, I'd love to hear your perspective. Bruno, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Suhail, can you hear me? Thank you. Thank you for that great insight. It must have been very challenging. Bruno, I'd love to hear from your perspective. Your business has shifted dramatically in the last few months, or this last year. Please share with us what the impact of COVID has been on e-commerce and your experience.
You know, a bit like I think Ozzy was talking about now. If I had $1 every time I heard the term pivot, I think I'd be a rich man and I would retire. You know, the reality is, you know, when you're part of a large multinational, you're able to get signals from different markets all the time. And, you know, we faced similar situation in the past where now specific crisis, whether now linked now to health, maybe social politics environment, force companies now to very, very quickly regroup and identify what is key. And that's kind of what happened for us as a company. We're very blessed that now we didn't have to invent an e-commerce strategy overnight. Now in March last year, we had one firmly entrenched over the last 20 years and very clear views of what we wanted to achieve. Now what the crisis has forced upon us is the obligation to execute it in a much narrower window than what we were expecting. What we didn't expect, however, is the speed at which consumer behavior have changed. So there's an element of channel change, and there's the element of the way consumers' behavior have changed. Now, we really believe as a company that some of the changes that consumers have embarked on now on the duress of the last 12 months will stay. And others now will maybe fade away. It's going to be based on choices that consumers are going to be making in terms of what works for them. So e-commerce for us has become now basically the way we underpin a consumer engagement strategy. There's a transactional element in relation to driving sales, obviously. But what we want to do is we want to make sure that we continue to engage and maintain a relationship with the consumers. Now, at the end of the day, I often say that the vast majority of people who visit e-commerce platforms do not buy online. They come online to consume content, to be better informed, to be inspired, to feel engaged and to find out more about topics, products or services they have been interested in. And really what we're trying to do now is not to do a better job of linking the two. Not focusing 100% only on conversion piece, which is accelerating and driving a fair amount of revenue now, but really not focusing on how we can really make sure that we leverage all those platforms and those audiences that have come away over the last 1 year, and really do justice to the audiences that have come and knocked on the door on the platforms and maintain a high level of communication and engagement. But the key element for us is how do we move from pure e-commerce transaction now to service online, virtually, and in brick and mortar, that enable now to have a frictionless environment for the consumers, give her the choice to purchase now online, offline, give her the choice to have services offline and online. And I think we believe that if we can do a better job at giving that choice to the consumer, will continue to grow. And so far, so good. The results are there, the company, so we're very blessed.
Wonderful. We'll talk about the specifically that they've experienced over this COVID period, and what kind of learnings really emerged for you about how to engage with customers, how to adapt your business in terms of shifting consumer behavior into 2021. Hi guys, sorry, it looks like my network is really playing up. I'm going to ask Anne to kick off with her view. We really are going to shift our focus now to brands.
Louisa, I think you were talking to me.
Yes. Hi, Angie. I'm going to ask you if you don't mind to share your slides from your computer. I'm busy transferring the deck to Impulse so that you guys don't have to suffer through my terrible Wi-Fi at the same time as me. So please go ahead, and then we can talk about the whole concept of where marketers should be focusing along the brand versus performance continuum.
Sure, just give me a sec. I'm just going to grab the deck quickly.
Okay. In the meanwhile, if you guys can hear me now, a question came in from Christabel asking what is the balance between e-commerce and in-store purchase, and would it be worth an FMCG brand investing? I don't know if you want to weigh in on that question, Zia. You just need to unmute.
Yeah, sorry if I understand it correctly, e-commerce as in transactions on the line, literally, versus in-store purchase. Was that right? Did I hear that properly? Sorry, and panelists, you guys get it?
Yeah, the question on the chat as well, yeah.
So what is the balance between
investing in if the long
from Christabel, what is the balance between e-commerce
and in-store purchase? Oh, I see.
It really is about talking to whether FMCG.
Yeah, so sorry, I just seen it on the chat as well. Thanks, guys. Yeah, do you know, I don't really know if there is an optimal balance right now. So I do think not only FMCG investing, but retail, you know, brick and mortar retailer and online retailer also being possibly the most agnostic sort of candidate, if you like, to try and do something like this. So yeah, I don't think there's a right balance of it yet, but I do think it does depend on what you're selling. But yeah, I think that should be something we should pursue. Sorry, Angie's got her really snazzy slides up.
Please go ahead, Angie.
Thank you. Can you all hear me okay? Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Great. So I thought I would just give a little bit of perspective on one of the topics that we touched on earlier, which was the struggle that we have in balancing brand or performance, or brand and performance. And it's something that we've experienced as a business. So I wanted to just share a couple of the challenges that we've had, what our approach was, a couple of learnings, in the hope that maybe you can take something valuable out of it and take some of it into your own business. So I'll never forget, about 6 years ago, I was sitting in a board meeting with our shareholders, and I was presenting our brand awareness results, which I'm sure many of you have done before. And I was really proud of the results. The numbers looked really good. And the trouble at the time, though, was that we had migrated our business from print to digital really successfully. But now we were in a place where there was pressure for everything to be measurable and for everything to be tied back to return on investment and everything to show a KPI impact. And performance was really in the spotlight. And the question that I often got asked in these meetings was, please show us the short-term impact of your brand advertising. And it became more and more difficult to motivate for brand spend. And I realized at that point that we were going to have a few challenges on our hands. So some of the challenges that I faced at the time was the narrative in the business was very much around performance marketing. The media mix, we were advertising above the line at the time. We were doing a lot of TV, radio, outdoor, print advertising. There was also this very obvious separation between brand and performance. It was treated completely separately for different objectives. We were struggling to measure brand and the impact of the money that we were spending on the bottom line and on conversion, and being able to articulate that to the business. And then overall being able to show a meaningful business impact so that I could motivate for spend in that space in the future. Oops. So when it comes to the automotive car shopping journey, there are on average about 24 touch points, and most of these are digital. So we started questioning whether using above the line was the right place to be targeting our consumer. There was pressure on budgets like we all face, and we started thinking about that. And then also the car shopping journey is about 3 to 6 months. So we were trying to understand whether we target in the short term with performance, but what about people that own a car and were only changing the car every 3 to 5 years? How were we going to make sure that we had brand strength and brand equity in the mind of the consumer in the long term? And so we had a look at the approach to try and overcome some of the challenges. So the first thing we did was I did a lot of work with our CEO on changing the narrative in the business and starting to speak about performance and brand instead of speaking about performance or brand, and really getting buy-in from all the stakeholders that this is how we were going to look at it moving forward. The other thing we did is we were quite bold, and we completely switched off above the line and moved all our spend into the digital space because we wanted to test and see if it was going to have the same sort of impact. And then we moved from separation to collaboration. And by that, I mean, I mentioned that our teams were separate. What we did was we combined our brand and performance teams into one. We gave them joint KPIs. And what was really good about it is there was a lot of knowledge sharing. There was a lot of collaboration. We found a lot of efficiencies through having the two teams actually working together. There was that seamless consistency or golden thread through creative and through the messaging across the different channels. And we really began to leverage the depth of the data that we were starting to get in the digital space. And then we were able to start creating things like affinity audiences and similar audiences and get just really granular with the targeting. And then from a measurement point of view, we invested in things like Google Analytics 360. We were really lucky to be able to do that. And we built some of our own tools to try and find ways that we could have a measurement or a meaningful measurement for brand. And really interesting, which I'll touch on at the end, is we saw a really big correlation between performance and brand in the digital space. And then in terms of showing the business impact, I refer to that as the 3 R's. So we were really looking to maximize reach across digital assets, so everything from YouTube, paid social, display, and so on. But we know that reach isn't really anything unless there's relevance. And the beauty of online, as you know, is that ability to switch out creative at a moment's notice. So we were really agile in our approach with our creative and messaging, and we wanted to tap into human truths, make sure we understood our audience a lot better, what their interests were, what type of advert would resonate with them, instead of doing just one type of creative. So that was really cool to be able to do. And then from a results point of view, these are the ones that I can share. There's obviously a lot more that I can't. But the one really big thing was moving from above the line to digital. We had 6 times the reach online with we had the same reach online with 6 times less spend. So from an efficiency point of view, that worked really well from a brand point of view. Our cost per reach was lower by 17%. We had an 18% brand awareness uplift and 52% uplift in ad recall. And then our cost per acquisition in search and our PPC campaigns were actually lower by 28%. Now, the interesting thing about this all for me was when brand and performance work in synergy together, we seem to get much better overall results in the business. So we saw our click-through rates improving in search when brand was switched on. We saw our CPAs coming down when brand was switched on. And what I said to my team is it's almost like running a relay race or driving a car. It's like brand is the petrol or the electric charge nowadays going into the vehicle. And then it's the performance marketing that actually pushes that forward and gets it over the finish line. And that's really what we've seen is in the business, is that if you can find a way to have a complementary strategy across brand and performance, they can work really, really well together instead of trying to look at them separately in the business. And I hope that just gives you a little bit of insight into how we thought about that, especially because we came from a very strong, dominant print business and then had to move everything into the online space. So thank you very much, and thanks, Louisa.
Oh, amazing. Thank you, Angie. You can, if you wouldn't mind, stop sharing. I think that your story is amazing, and it just shows you how businesses are absolutely able to pivot in these wild and crazy times that we've been through. I'd love to get, certainly from all of you, but specifically, I think, Bruno, you had very clear views on this brand versus performance continuum and how that, the weight of that shifted in your business over time, as your business has shifted more online.
Yeah, and I guess that's the paradigm. You know, now, do you need to work at the top of the funnel or do you need to work at the bottom of the funnel? The reality is you need to be everywhere, and especially in the middle. Now, the view has always been now traditionally that now from a brand perspective, it always had to be about now big brand moment, big campaign, reach, frequency, being able not to try to reach as many people as possible with a single message, hoping that somehow that message would land with enough people that it would convert within a reasonably stupid window of no sales promotional activities. So what we had to do is we really had to rejig it completely our way of thinking. And I think e-commerce is what has helped us get there in an ironic way, is now we had to shift from being always now about big brand moment, reach and frequency, and really not trying to figure out what it takes to try not to really now create highly engaged audience and to get those people to convert online. So we went maybe from one extreme to the other. And over the last couple of years, now we're growing way back to somehow the middle layer, because in order now for us to be really effective and to drive now proper return on that spend and to be able not to deliver on the expectation of the business, we can't continue to just drive awareness for the sake of it. We need to create top of mind awareness. We need to drive consideration. We need to create intent for consumers to want to engage further. because that's really what drives essentially now conversion and proper return. So I think now the way I've looked at it is now whether it's called performance-based marketing, whether it's basically goal-based planning. Now a lot of brands I feel a bit conflicted because the budget typically always top of the funnel, but with a paradigm of needing to deliver sales at the bottom of the funnel in a very narrow window. It's not campaign by campaign anymore. It needs to be driven as an always-on proposition, where you're trying to always be available and discoverable for consumers who are at different stages of the journey with the brand, whether it is not top-line awareness or maybe already highly engaged. And that's what makes, I think, media complicated today. There is no magic bullet anymore to reach the adult consumers. We need to touch a lot of different consumers at different touch points or different steps of the journey, and need to do it with very differentiated basically media assets. That's really what creates, I think, the complexity now of marketing and media today. But the magic behind that is if you can start orchestrating it, then you start getting really rich first-party data that now enable you to better inform the next campaign. And as you do it more and more and more, you start yielding much higher return on that spend, and that becomes now self-sustainable in terms of profit. So that's kind of the way we look at it today. We really believe that now there may be moment now and again for big brand moment, but they're far and few. We really want to rather be relevant to our consumers 365 and always be available for them not to engage further.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And Bruno, the other thing, or to the whole panel, is what it means is the traditional organizational structure. In other words, the marketers that we employ and that kind of help us to achieve these incredibly multifaceted, complex objectives across multiple channels, finding the right balance, test and learn, becomes even more challenging for the marketing organization. So I don't know if you've got any insights into that and how you at KFC are able to manage such a team with such diverse skills.
Yeah, it's an interesting debate, right? I mean, I think if you speak about performance marketing, I'll say I'm on the fence, but I'm leaning towards the brand building side, right? My head sort of, veering towards there. And I think, for me, if I call performance marketing, what I call it's sales activation. Essentially, it's geared towards generating sales. I mean, the reality is we're all under pressure to deliver sales. It does drive out what I would call short-termism. So, it's short-term marketing tactics that exploit our brand equities just to drive sort of persuasive messaging, and you're really going after the sale. And for me, I think, from an internal perspective at KFC, we believe in driving sales overnight, but brand over time, right? So you have to try to do both at the same time. And I think ultimately that's how we structure, that's how internally we sort of focus our resources. But in the longer run, I mean, brand building really is geared towards generating future sales. And I think I sit in that space, very much in that space. We need to continue building that brand equity by just emotionally engaging with our consumers. And I think if you look at sales activation, it's where you naturally would go. It's quick turnaround. It's measurable. As a marketer, it's very easy to say, hey, I did X and I got Y return. Whereas with brand building, there's it's the art and science, and you won't always have the results that you can go back to your stakeholders and show. So from a KFC perspective, I think we've taken this view of sales overnight and brand over time. We know that there are some very, I would say, passport factors that we need to deliver. So for example, if e-commerce is the space, we're absolutely investing in that space. It's absolutely the right thing to do, but it will not be at the expense of brand building and longer term sort of driving messages around our brand, our values, and also purpose. I think purpose is a really important thing to drive trust with our consumers. So we run a massive feeding scheme in Ad Hope. We've not ignored that. If anything, over the last year, we've actually invested more in that space, because ultimately that's what's going to generate trust with our consumers and also position us for long-term success.
Wonderful, thanks, Suhail. Zia, just very briefly, are you finding that this is a trend amongst your balance that Angie mentioned?
Yeah, it always has been, I want to say. Yeah, it's always been a very, very hot topic. And I think if you have clients like Suhail, who always sits on the brand side and now slowly is moving over, then it's only taken 3 years to prove it. But on a serious note, it really has always been a tough job. But I think, as ever, now we don't really see many brands have, shall we say, enough investment to just do thematic advertising, within on TV, for example. So within that 1 minute, 3 minute TV ad, there's a lot of hopefully intentions that brand wants to try and convey there. So I actually feel more compassionate to the creative houses actually to try and do all of this with a buy now, if they could, on that screen. So it's a lot of trying to do the balance of brand, emotive, why, etc., and transact at the same time, without just being a sort of a buy now button straight away. So yeah, it's always been there, basically.
Thanks, Thea. So while we've been having this chat, Mpho and I have done some magic, and she's going to share the screen now so that you're not reliant on my Wi-Fi to watch these amazing case studies. So what we thought would be nice is to share with you some of the Smarties gold winners. And we've got the actual agencies and brands here who can really give us their overview of what they believe really worked for the brand. So Mpho, if you click on our Otriven case study to start, please just put it into presentation mode from current slide. Oops. Okay. You okay there? All right. We're gonna while we're waiting for Mpho to pick up that video, I wonder the guys who actually won gold for the Otriven campaign are with us today, and I'd love just to get a quick overview, just while Mpho's Greg, while Mpho is teeing this up for the ad colony sort of experience with this particular campaign. Just a quick 2 minutes.
Okay. Hello everyone. Thanks for the time. Pretty excited to be here. I hope you can all hear me. Essentially, we play in the in-app space, and we're particularly excited about the campaign that we ran for Otriven, purely when we start looking at the metrics that matter. And I think that's how we've built success. We have got a little video that I'm hoping, Mpho, you'll be able to quickly show. It'll give you a sense from a performance perspective how the campaign ran, and then perhaps we can just talk a little bit around the attention metric. And obviously that's where we believe we're really offering a solution in this digital landscape, because I think, we seem to have lost the plot a little bit when it comes to actual ad units within this ecosystem. So we understand the scale behind the digital world. We understand that consumers are spending time there. We understand that there are multiple touch points, but are we really questioning the ad units that we're currently buying? And I think that for me is going to be a very hot topic going into 2021, is the attention metric. Do we have consumers' attention? Are they receptive to our advertising? And if so, we'll start to deliver great results. So Mpho, I don't know if you can go on to the video that we've provided. I have no volume, unfortunately, so I hope you guys can hear this. Bruno, you're on screen. Is there volume?
No, there isn't.
Okay. Mpho, if you wouldn't mind, just stop sharing. And when you share again, just select share computer audio, the little checkbox on the bottom left. And then if you
Right,
could play the video again. There we go.
There we go. Music makes it a lot more tolerable. So I think it's just what we're trying to illustrate here is the power of an effective ad unit in this digital landscape. So it was exactly what Zia alluded to, where he was talking about having shoppable ad units. In this case, the consumer was actually able to engage with the video. So it was a 100% interactive video opportunity. And really what we're trying to showcase there is that consumers, if we can take a TV stance behind digital, and we can actually get the consumer's attention, they will play, they will engage, and you will drive better results. So an amazing campaign, and yeah, very, very proud of it.
Awesome, thank you so much. We're going to run through three gold winners in the media section, and then we can chat about it as a panel afterwards. So the next one is Gorilla, who's going to talk us through their Hewlett's Humtham. Sorry, go to the next slide, Paul. The Humtham campaign. That's the incorrect spelling. There we go. Off you go.
Oh, and can everyone hear me? All good.
Yep.
Oh, thanks for joining us. We're excited to be presenting this. The way we've structured this presentation, and I'm going to keep it short because we're quite pressed for time, is as a bit of a story, because the campaign in itself and our introduction to the client was a story in itself. Okay, next slide. So in January last year, 2020, seems like a lifetime ago, we were invited to pitch on the Hewlett Sugar account. They were in a battle against cheaper imports coming into the markets. They had officially become a proudly South African product, and they wanted to tell the world about it. Cool, next slide. So we started obviously with the strategy. one of the major problems we found is that, sugar is sweet, and all sugar is the same. So we wanted to get these proud sugar-using South Africans who think that all sugar is the same to choose proudly South African Hewlett sugar by showing them that while all sugar is sweet, only Hewlett's homegrown sugar will hit their patriotic sweet spot. So we put our thinking caps on and we went back with a really exciting, really patriotic, big campaign. Next slide. And in February, we're a very, very happy jungle. We had won the account and we were tasked with, starting to pull together the pre-work on a heritage campaign for Hewlett's. Next slide. We all know what happened in March. The very early days of COVID, when the rumblings of it spreading around the world, the first cases in South Africa, and the beginning of a new normal for South Africans, for agencies, for brands. There was obviously a lot of concern at the time that we may be insensitive to the advertising. Brands that were advertising were taking quite a somber, we are in it together kind of tone. And as a brand that is all about adding a little bit of sweetness, there was some hesitation with a very new client of ours as to whether we pause and postpone until a later date. Next slide, please. But we looked around and we realized that, not just Hewlett's workers were out in the fields working. People were socially isolating, they were wearing masks. And that in itself was an incredibly patriotic emotion and action from South Africans. So instead of bidding the campaign and not saying anything, we went back to the brand team with a campaign that addressed COVID, was in the context of COVID, but still brought a little bit of sweetness to people's lives. Next slide, please. And it was the Hewlett's National Anthem. So our initial pitch had been all about singing the national anthem. We realized that with a mask on, you can't really sing, but you can still express your pride through a hum. We then produced, using real Hewlett's workers out on their farms, a full-length national anthem video that we then broke out into a variety of assets for social, for YouTube, for display in various lengths, from 6-second cut downs to 15 seconds to 30 seconds. On the next slide, I've got the 30-second TDC that we actually pulled out of the video as well and flattened on SABC. Next slide, please. Yep. Push play.
Hewlett's, proudly South African sugar.
So as I said, we had the full 2-minute video on YouTube with a really great amount of reach. We had this flattening on TVC on SABC, and the next thing for us to do was, it's not just about Hewlett's expressing their national pride, but to invite South Africans to show their South African pride and share their anthem with us. Next slide, please. Sorry, you can skip the slide.
Hewlett's.
Okay. Sorry, one back. There we go. And even watching this now, masks seem such a commonplace part of our lives now. But remember, this was also launched end of June, July, and into August, where wearing masks and socially distancing was really quite new for all of us. Next slide, please. And we received over 3,000 anthems from South Africans, which was wonderful. There were, teachers at schools, parents with their kids, people of all shapes, sizes, and colors, showing their pride with the anthem. People really picked up with it. It was nice. So for Heritage Day, we took a montage of these 3,000 and launched our own video on Heritage Day. You can go to the next slide, please.
Hulet's, proudly South African sugar.
Oh, then one slide, so into the results. So the campaign was wonderfully received. You know, huge reach, huge engagement. Our Facebook engagement rate was 43%, which is phenomenal. We were thrilled with over 27 hours of humthums submitted to us. But then what was really key for us and really key for the brand in their battle against cheaper imports was the improvements they saw on brand attributes. So after the campaign period, 21% improvement on Hewlett's inspires South Africans to stand together, 18% improvement in preferred brand, a whopping 60% improvement on Hewlett is a proudly South African brand, and because sales are so important, a 4% increase in market share. Cool, that's us, thank you. Hope you enjoyed, hope you started humming.
Wonderful, thanks, Jordan. An amazing campaign, great results, and really emotionally very stirring. So the last of the 3 gold winners that we wanted to share is Retroactive Retroviral's Match Kit campaign. Mike, are you on the line? Okay, he was on earlier, but I think he's dropped off. So we're going to share the video on Match Kit, and you'll get a sense of how amazing this campaign was. Off you go.
COVID-19 crisis is dramatically changing the entertainment industry.
We consume sport as a form of entertainment. At this stage, the sporting industry is hurting.
A very disruptive time for athletes.
It's had a major impact on the vast majority of high-level athletes who have been unable to compete or train due to lockdown restrictions.
All the matches are either postponed or cancelled like they are all around the world.
As a pro athlete, your personal brand needs to be as slick as your training regime.
World Cup winning Springbok star Brian Habana has announced the launch of MatchKit.co, an informative platform that gives athletes a groundbreaking solution towards growing their commercial brands.
With MatchKit.co, we're offering them the opportunity to potentially commercialize, sell merchandise, sell videos and voice notes, and in so doing, keep their brand alive.
MatchKit is an easy DIY website builder that enables athletes to showcase their sporting pedigree, to show potential sponsors the scope and quality of an athlete's influence.
Let's talk about this innovation you guys have come up with. It's called MatchKit.
Definitely going to be helping so many athletes across the board.
We've seen the rise of social media. Players and athletes from around the world, they're all on these different entities. And I think what we're doing from MatchKit.co is consolidating that whole environment.
It brings together so many elements onto one platform.
The current restrictions on many sporting codes due to COVID-19 require sportsmen and women to think more like entrepreneurs.
MatchKit.co. Extremely excited to be launching a pretty cool digital platform today called MatchKit.co.
Fabulous new platform to help professional sports people to leverage their brands.
Good thinking on your behalf about this new innovative platform.
You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. It's an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before.
Fabulous. It's an amazing campaign, and MatchKit is just going from strength to strength, signing up international teams and athletes and really creating a whole new media platform for athletes to own their brands and monetize them. So that really gives you a taste of some of the amazing campaigns that as judges we saw at the Smarties. I wanted to get just a brief view from the panel on what you thought about the quality of entries this year and the process of getting brands and agencies to present their campaigns directly to the judging panel, the top performing ones. So Angie, I don't know if you want to weigh in first.
Sure, thanks, Louisa. So I think the first thing is that it was my first year as a Smarties judge. So it was really great to be able to be exposed to a lot of the campaigns. And I think a couple of things really stood out for me. One was the campaigns were really contextual in terms of where we found ourselves. So Match Kit really took advantage of the fact that obviously sportsmen couldn't do what they would usually do. I really loved the way that Otrivan went and got consumers to engage in a really immersive way, because I think the stat at the moment is that consumers are scrolling past social media posts at like 2 seconds. So their attention span is pretty low. When I say them, I mean all of us too. So to actually cut through that clutter at the moment is not easy, to get people to stop in their tracks and actually take notice of something and engage. So I just think that the level of the entries was exceptional. I really, really did think so. And I think the 3 that you've highlighted here were really some of the best ones. So congratulations to everybody. I thought in a year that was really tough, where we had to really think out of the box and tap into emotions and cut through the clutter, it was really great.
Thanks, Angie. So Hale, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, my first time as well. So I think what really stood out for me was, from an agency point of view, I got the sense that there was a lot of pressure. So be that time pressure, be that budget pressure. I think some of the stories were crazy. But I think what stood out for me as a result was that, there was a lot of courage displayed by both agencies as well as clients. It was really interesting to see the lengths that people would go to make something happen. And I think that resulted in breakthrough work. It really did. And what we saw was a lot of it was breakthrough. What I also liked about it, I think the Otrivan example is a good one, was also it was invasive. I think from a mobile point of view, that's something, it's on you all the time. And here's this campaign that's literally, you're starting to like play with your phone, and it's invasive. And for a brand like that, that's courage. That's courage for a brand to do that. And I think Mike, you spoke about take a TV approach to mobile. I found that fascinating, and I think we need to encourage more of that. And ultimately, I think what I really took away from this was that playing in this space with courage, playing in this space with with agencies that are willing to go that extra mile, drives positive results. I mean, the numbers that we saw across all the entries were super positive. So, for me, it was a great experience and really great to see how brands are playing in this space.
Great, thanks, Suhail. Zia, how did you find the entries this year?
I think everybody's touched on most of the great things from an entry perspective, but for me, I think the format of being allowed to present it back was actually the real kicker for me, actually. So you're not sort of governed by entirely the form, although obviously we did the shortlisting from there, but being able to present it back in human form actually was just really, really great, really, really great. I think that's how you get the real sense of some of the gold winners today across. So that was really, really a distinctive moment for me.
Great, thanks, Zia. And Bruno, if you wouldn't mind rounding us off on your view of the quality of work, the standard of work in South Africa today, and you can compare it for us against global best practice, because you're aware of what's going on around the world, certainly in your category.
First of all, creatively, it's amazing the quality that comes out of now agencies and brands in South Africa. It's always been now really, really now defined as some of the best work that you find globally, and it's maybe testament not to how innovative now agencies and brands have to be in a market that is complex and require a lot of different sensitivity to touch such a wide and diverse audience. I agree with what the other panelists now spoke about. The entries were really good this year. Like Zia, I think now that the new format does better justice to the work that now is being presented. I think in prior years, whether it is with the Smarties or maybe other awards, it's almost feel like it's lost in translation. Great work get penalized because maybe below par effort has been put in trying to explain what they were trying to achieve in the first place. And that maybe goes back now to the other theme relating now to outcome-based marketing is, I think some of the more robust conversation that maybe Zia alluded to now during the panel was more by trying to match what we saw the results to be, and they all seem to be fantastic, but trying to match that with what were they trying to achieve in the first place. And that to me is really going back now to whether it's outcome-based or in our world we call that goal-based, is the more we understand what now the objective of the company is, the more we can then basically now estimate how successful what that company is, not just by looking at metrics that tend to be really, really impressive, millions of views, millions of impressions. Natively, it's super impressive, but you need to benchmark it to what was the objective. And I think one of the elements that really came through is at the end of the day, and I think a couple of us spoke about it, is with it to generate revenue. It's not about vanity metrics anymore. We need to find a way to convert. We need to bring people to the point of conversion, not just of intent. And some of the better campaigns demonstrated that they were able not really create top of mind awareness and create lifts in sales, and that basically generate revenue. And that by default is really what we're about, is we're there to be able to create incremental revenue and profit for brands. So I think this year was way better than the previous year, and I'm sure next year will be even better. I really hope we can maintain that format of getting people presenting the campaigns, because the storytelling element of it really put context to the work that's been done.
Wonderful, thank you, Bruno. So we're getting to the last section of our session today, and we're going to be screening a talk that Joel Rubinson delivered to the MMA, EMEA, and the US on his new framework, which Bruno sort of referred to, and many of the speakers have spoken about, which is a new way of evaluating the efficacy of your marketing and also segmenting and targeting more effectively. He calls it the new outcome-based marketing framework. And it really is based on research that was conducted around what percentage of your investment, your marketing investment, should be allocated to which segment of the market. It's really fascinating. He talks about a new segment called the movable middle, and he's going to share his insights from the research with us. Before we kick off with that video, it's a fairly long video, and we do understand if you can't watch through the whole thing. Before we finish, I want to thank the panel really so much. Angie, Suhail, Zia, Bruno, thank you so much for the time you spent, as well as all of the amazing agencies who delivered such incredible campaigns to win Smarties Gold. So thanks so much, guys, for your time and your investment in this industry, in sharing knowledge and making us all better marketers. And thank you, Enver, also for kicking us off. So with no further ado, I am going to ask Mpho to start screening the video. It's really great. It's a long video, but it's worth watching. If you find you can't make the whole one, then please do feel free to let us know. Mpho will send out a link to the video after this. So thanks, guys. We'll chat to you on the other side. Go for it.
Thanks, Louisa.
Thanks a lot, Greg. So the work that I'm going to be presenting today, sharing with all of you, which is incredibly exciting, was the joint effort of Newstar and the MMA. I'm pleased to be part of the MMA team for this as their MTA subject matter expert. We have impressive academic advisors from UCLA and from Oxford, great marketing advisors, and last but not least, a data partner in Numerator, who provided their tremendously valuable receipt scanning data for us to be able to enable this research. So marketers and media strategy are in transition. There's a struggle that's going on between the tradition of planning for the most reach possible that you can afford, and also for experts advising that that's the right way to plan your media. And there's a dilemma between that and the increase in the amount of targeting that's going on via the capabilities for addressable marketing using digital. So how can marketers really resolve or come to grips with this change? And what we've done as we've worked together, all of those partners and advisors on that first slide, is we've created an alternative to reach-based planning called outcomes-based planning. So reach planning is about finding the least expensive way of buying the most reach, the most eyeballs that you can afford. Outcomes-based planning doesn't start with reach. It starts with finding those consumer segments that are predicted to have the highest responsiveness to a brand's advertising and target those consumers and those segments with greater media weight. So we created this framework and then we tested it. We tested the two approaches against each other. So what I'm going to do is first show you what we found, top line of what we found, and then go into why we found it and what else we learned. So the top line is outcomes-based planning outperformed reach-based planning by over 50%. Quite significant to have an over 50% improvement in the ROI of your advertising. Excuse me. And this was based on a $10 million ad campaign that was run over the course of 8 weeks. So, you're looking at $11 million in additional revenue for the same investment. And over the course of a year for this particular brand that had a little over 300 million in sales annually, you're talking about implementing this on an ongoing basis would result in $44 million in incremental revenue. And that this approach could be used over and over again. There's no reason why any ad dollars wouldn't be governed by outcomes-based planning. Even if you were to include incremental royalties, CPM surcharges for having to access a segment, the reduction in the ROAS for outcomes-based planning would be small, 25 cents to 50 cents. Although in many cases, there's really no additional charge in that marketers are often licensing these segments anyway. It's just they might not be licensing the right segments with the right framework in mind. So now that we know that outcomes-based planning outperforms reach-based approaches, why did we get this result? So the first point about this is reach-based planning kind of has this unstated assumption that all consumers are pretty much average, but all consumers are not average. They're not average in their value, as you've heard from prior speakers, but they're also not average in their likelihood of responding to your advertising. And what we've discovered is, in fact, there's math that allows you to predict which consumers will have much higher responsiveness to your brand's advertising. So what I'd like you to do is first think about this graph on the right. And the x-axis is a consumer who has a purchase probability towards the brand of somewhere between 0, meaning they don't like the brand, they never buy the brand, never will buy the brand, all the way up to 100%, meaning they buy the brand all the time. And if you look at the right part of this graph, what this says is that people who are going to buy your brand 90 or 100% of the time, advertising provides very little lift, which is the y-axis, provides very little lift. And the reason for that, of course, is that if they're already buying your brand 90 to 100% of the time, advertising can't improve that. You already have all their purchases. Now, one aspect of MTA modeling using a logistic regression, which is kind of the workhorse of MTA, and this is not something that is widely thought about, but if you dig into the math, very quickly you find that the function is actually symmetric, which means that if people at the upper end aren't going to respond to advertising, then people at the lower end aren't going to respond to advertising either. It's math, so it has to work out that way. But it also makes a lot of sense. If people just, don't buy your brand, obviously they have other preferences, they've rejected your brand, or you're just, out of sight, out of mind for them. And so their response to advertising is also low for your brand, because they're responding to some other brand's advertising. So who responds to your advertising? It's in the middle of these purchase probabilities. People who have a 50-50 chance of buying your brand have the highest responsiveness to your advertising. The lift in their purchase probability towards your brand is maximized. Now, if we broaden that a little bit and we create a segment of people who have between a 20 and an 80% probability of buying your brand, we're going to call that segment the movable middle. And we find that segment very interesting from a media planning point of view, because mathematically, they should have 5 times, not 5%, 5 times the ad responsiveness of those consumers who are not in the movable middle. Now, what else do we know about the movable middle? This is what makes it really very valuable. We know how to size the movable middle for a given brand. We know how big it is. And we also know where to find these people. So in terms of size, it turns out that if you use something called a beta distribution, which is a real workhorse in probability modeling, the beta distribution, if you input just 2 numbers about a brand, its market share and its repeat rate, you can actually predict extremely accurately how big is that movable middle. How many category buyers are between 20% and 80% probability of purchase. And what you see here is for a 5-share brand, that's pretty unfortunate. They have a really low movable middle. So a small brand practicing reach marketing, basically 92% of your ad impressions are going to be wasted because they're going to consumers who have a really unprofitable level of response to your advertising. As the share gets bigger, a 20-share brand will have 33% in the movable middle. Well, that's pretty good. A 46-share brand will have even more. They'll have 53% in the movable middle. So now you see a big brand advantage that really matters because it's about the ad responsiveness that consumers have to that particular brand. But here's the thing. Every brand, even a small brand, is a big brand somewhere. It's the same brand as many brands. So what we did was we took this concept and we worked with Neustar's Element 1 or E1 segmentation approach, where what that is 172 segments defined by demographics and life stages. And we looked at a particular brand. We actually looked at a few different brands, and we said, how big is the movable middle in the best segments and how small is it in the worst segments? And so I kind of pulled a trick on you guys. The bars on the left are not actually 3 brands. That's the same brand in 3 different segments, which I've plotted on this graph. So what you see is in segment 166, the brand is it has a very large share and a very large movable middle, and segment 141 also pretty large. But segment 2, that's a pretty low segment and very unlikely to respond to advertising. So that led us to a hypothesis. Well, what if we took money using addressable marketing away from those segments where the movable middle is really small for this brand, and we redeployed it to those segments where the movable middle is large? We said, what would happen if we did that? So that was really the framing for the study that we did. So let me show you what we actually did. First, we created a sandbox, a digital representation of a brand of frozen pizza in the frozen pizza category, where we were able to perfectly replicate actually the numerator data that was shared with us on that category and on that particular brand. We created over 600,000 virtual consumers, and we distributed them across the E1 segments, the 172 segments. so that they represented the distribution of households across these segments. And then we simulated 1 year of purchasing, which, as I said, we know replicated the actual numerator data really extremely closely. So then that gave us a baseline and a control cell in effect. And we said, okay, so now let's run 3 kinds of campaigns. What if we introduce a base campaign at week 40 for 8 weeks and see what happens? And then what if, based on the learning of the base campaign, we tweak it to maximize the reach of the campaign? So we created a reach campaign. And then what if we create a third campaign, which follows this principle of using targeting to focus on outcomes, to really tilt the media exposure towards those segments that have the highest movable middle? So we ran these 3 campaigns. The CPM assumptions were reviewed by our advisory board, so we know they were realistic. And because this is largely a media science study, the creative was assumed to be of average quality. Then we analyzed the results. We compared the results across the 3 campaigns. We compared them each to the baseline of no media. And as you know, the outcomes-based plan won by a lot. So we confirmed the extensibility of this to other categories. Numerator was kind enough to share data from 4 categories on 46 brands that we were able to analyze. And then we took all our findings and we went through a fairly deep review with our academic advisors to make sure that, the math was correct, passed muster, and that the findings were solid. So we did all that. So let's go through what we learned. What we learned overall, but let's dig a little bit deeper. So what we found was, for this particular brand of frozen pizza, there was a top quartile of E1 segments that had a movable middle of 33% of category buyers, and a bottom quartile that had a movable middle of only 3.9%. So clearly there's a huge amount of heterogeneity here that we were able to take advantage of. The second thing we noted from our study of the base plan, so this was first, let's run like a normal base plan and let's learn from that. We found that the top quartile delivered a ROAS, return on ad spend, of $4.36. That means for every $1 of advertising, incremental advertising, the brand got a return of $4.36 in revenue. So that's, highly profitable. On the other hand, the bottom quartile only returned 67 cents on the dollar. Clearly that's underwater. So again, this reinforced the idea of, what if we take money from the bottom quartiles and we redeploy it to the top quartile? So the base plan delivered media roughly in proportion to the percent of households in each one of these quartiles. The reach plan did pretty much the same thing. The real difference with the reach plan is we wound up increasing the percent of the media that was in linear TV because based on our simulations, that actually improved reach somewhat. So that was the right way to go for reach. Now for the outcomes-based plan, the key focus here was targeting. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to achieve a much higher percent of the media budget going to this top quartile. And we're actually able to triple the amount of media weight. Now, not all your dollars are targetable. So clearly we couldn't put 100% of the media against the first quartile. And we're not sure that's what we even would have wanted to do. But to triple from 21 to 56, roughly triple, the media weight, that seemed like a reasonable thing to do and to test and see what would happen. And in this plan, linear TV was reduced a little bit because, again, we wanted to accentuate our targetability. So when we did this, now keep in mind, it wasn't clear that this would win. Just because you're putting more money against the top quartile in terms of movable middle and in terms of ROAS, that doesn't mean that all this extra media weight is going to pay off. I mean, maybe you hit saturation effects. Maybe it winds up being worse, not better. So when we ran the analysis, as you know, overall, it actually did work out that it was better. The outcomes plan beat the reach plan and the base plan substantially. In fact, you see the reach plan actually did a little bit worse in terms of generating incremental revenue than the base plan did. So this was confirmation of what we thought might be the case, but the next slides are kind of icing on the cake that we did not even expect until we saw the result. What we saw was that even though the outcomes-based plan is focused on targeting the movable middle of a brand, which kind of sounds like mostly you're targeting the brand's own buyers, it actually winds up achieving higher penetration for the brand. So if you see at the bottom, the overall penetration from the start of the campaign to the end of the year was 10.9% with no media, went to 13.5% with the reach plan. So yes, the reach plan increased the penetration for the brand, but the outcome-based plan actually increased the brand penetration even more. And particularly surprising was that it even outperformed the reach plan among non-buyers. So the paradox, the happy paradox, is that you're developing a targeting plan based on finding the movable middle for a particular brand, but it winds up actually outperforming the reach plan for non-buyers. So how does that work? Well, one aspect of this is remember that the movable middle was in the 33% range or whatever for the top quartile. That means there's still a lot of non-buyers who are in those segments that you're targeting with extra media weight. So I'm going to dig into that for a second. The final part of this is the outcomes-based plan. So it beats the reach plan in overall sales. It beats the reach plan in overall penetration. It beats the reach plan in terms of increasing the conversion rate of non-buyers into buyers. It increases the retention rate among your different buyer groups. It also adds value of a customer because you can see the small table on the right, the number of purchases that occurred from the start of the campaign to the end of the year is greater in the outcome plan than it is in the reach plan for every one of these buyer groups. So the outcomes plan really achieved benefits that even we did not anticipate until we dug into the math to understand why we got this result. So it really was pretty remarkable. Now, as we dug in further, there's one more really important finding that came out of this, and that is if you take all the E1 segments, the 172 segments, and you triangularize them in a graph. So the segments that delivered the highest return on ad spend are on the left, and then they keep proceeding in an orderly way down to the lowest ROAS segments on the right. That's the blue line. Okay, so we kind of expected to find that different segments would deliver different ROAS. Okay. The green line was particularly surprising to us. What that says is that if you just focus on the non-buyers, that is consumers defined, I should have said this on the prior chart, the buyer groups are defined based on the first 8 months of data, and then we see how each of those buyer groups responds to advertising. So if you look at people defined as non-buyers based on the first 8 months of data, and then see how they respond to advertising, it turns out that while overall the non-buyers are unprofitable to advertise to, it turns out the non-buyers who exist in the top quartile of E1 segments in terms of the size of the movable middle, they are actually profitable to advertise to. So they respond at a much higher rate to your advertising, and they respond profitably. So you're getting a higher conversion rate overall of non-buyers, but you're getting also a profitable ROAS from non-buyers. Now, you might not have even known before this presentation that advertising to non-buyers is unprofitable, but it almost always is. It's just that the overall ROAS gets masked by the response of the buyers. So what we've done is we've clarified that, but we've also unpacked the non-buyers and found that the non-buyers within those segments that have a high density of movable middle, those non-buyers are actually lookalikes for buyers because they exist in these same demographic life stage clusters. So they're more likely to have needs or interests that would lead them to become buyers at some point. So by focusing higher media weight against these lookalikes for buyers, that is a primary reason why the return on ad spend among the non-buyers actually becomes positive through this outcomes-based targeting plan. So really, you have wins all around, winning in every way for the outcomes-based plan. So the next question is, well, this is what we found on this particular study. You know, how valid is it? How much can you believe it's going to apply to your particular business? So we can't necessarily say how applicable it is to everyone who's on the call today, but what we can say is that we did validate this, and we did validate the generalizability of this. So first of all, let's talk about the digital representation of our sandbox for this particular brand of frozen pizza. And the first point is that when you input, just two numbers are needed into the beta distribution, the market share and the repeat rate. That is the percent of buyers who buy the brand twice in a row. When you input just those two numbers, you can trace out an estimate of the distribution of category buyers by percent probability of buying your brand. So how many consumers have a 0 to 5% chance of buying your brand? How many category buyers are 6 to 10, all the way up to 95 to 100% probability of buying your brand? So we're plotting out 20 numbers just based on inputting these two numbers into the beta distribution. And what you see is that when we compare the prediction of each of these 20 points, it matches the actual numerator receipt scanning data virtually perfectly. There's a 99% correlation between the prediction of the distribution of how many category buyers will buy you a certain percent of the time and what the actual data shows. And it turns out once you get this distribution right, which we can do, which we now know we can do using the beta distribution, you get everything else right. So when we recreated off the simulations, the market share for this brand of frozen pizza, the share was right in alignment. The penetration was right in alignment. And penetration is not even an input into this model. It's an outgrowth out of the model. But the penetration was virtually perfect. The repeat rate was virtually perfect. So, you know, so we see how well the loyalty distribution, this distribution of purchase probabilities worked in this particular case. And the next question is, well, how do we know it's going to work in the next case and the case after that? So we asked Numerator to share more data with us. They shared their purchase data based on receipt scanning for 4 categories: frozen pizza, laundry detergent, nutrition bars, and butter margarine. Very different categories in terms of the structure of the categories, how many brands there are, and the leadership structure, and so on. And we were able to focus on 46 brands. Other brands become a little small, but there were 46 brands that we were able to focus on. And we modeled every one of the 46 brands using the same approach: input the share, input the repeat rate, predict the distribution of purchase probabilities, compare it to the actual distribution. So I'm just showing you a few of the charts. The price brand for detergent, you can't even tell there's 2 lines there, but there is. The prediction is basically perfect. We also forecasted the leading brand of nutrition bars, which had a bigger share. So detergents was 7.5. The pizza brand that I showed you before was about 10. The nutrition bar is 16. Again, perfect fit. And then we even really stress tested our approach by looking at private label butter margarine. Now, private label is the leader, but it's actually not one brand. It depends on what store you shop. But even there, we got a 92% correlation. So clearly, the model fit the data really well and is very extensible across a broad range of situations. So where are we? What have we learned? Well, we're really moving towards a new science for media planning. We've learned that outcomes-based planning wins. It beats reach-based planning. It appears that it will outperform reach-based planning in terms of ROI or ROAS by 50% by taking advantage of consumer heterogeneity and then using targeting as the way of doing that. Secondly, we've learned that targeting is required, but you have to do it the right way. You can't do it by identifying a really slim demographic group. You have to do it based on brand probabilities of purchase and finding this movable middle and where the movable middle is larger. Third, outcomes-based planning is most likely to deliver long-term benefit. Now, this is really another one of those kind of rock your world findings, because the whole outcomes-based planning approach is based on saying, well, how can we get more sales response to our advertising, in the campaign and in the post-campaign, but within a relatively short period? Well, it turns out that when you do this, you also win on the characteristics that are good for long-term brand building. You win on converting non-buyers, you win on retaining your buyers, you win on raising purchase rates. And so therefore, there's no reason not to believe that this wouldn't be best both for short-term and for long-term. So, and there's also no reason why you can't use brand building advertising in conjunction with the outcome-based planning model that we've just presented. So we think this is really a win all around. And the final point here is repeatable success of this. Listen, this new science is based on law-like mathematical relationships. It should work for a brand repeatedly. So unlike creative, where sometimes creative really succeeds and sometimes not, this is math and this is science. It's going to work for a brand on every wave of advertising, on every campaign, on every ad dollar that's spent, whether the purpose is performance or it's brand building. So we really believe that hopefully this is stimulating your thinking about a different way of investing your advertising dollars. And the final slide, the final thoughts I'd like to share is that the implementation of this is somewhat different. You really have to change your orientation away from reach, away from top down to bottom up. You have to get targeting right. But I just want to say that targeting is more than addressable marketing. Yes, you have to be able to identify the movable middle and how you can address media to them specifically, using the kinds of addressable digital capabilities that exist. But getting targeting right also means, for example, taking TV shows and profiling TV shows by this concept of a movable middle. So if you profile them using the wrong metrics, then you're going to make the wrong media choices, even for linear TV or for websites and direct deals and so on. So profile the media audiences the right way. Markets, you have local market funds. You can profile DMAs. Brand development indices can be quite different across markets. Spend more money where your brand development index is higher. Now, we didn't talk a lot about tactics, but tactics is obviously part of this. If you do marketing mix modeling or MTA, certain things, certain channels or tactics work better for a given brand for whatever reason. So clearly you want to use that also as part of the outcomes-based planning approach. Third, use the right creator for the objective. As I said, there's no reason to believe that this won't work for brand creative, where you want people to think or feel something new about your brand, versus reminder performance creative. And finally, and this is maybe a pretty thought-provoking idea, I think that when you use outcomes-based planning built off of ROAS, what happens is that it will actually lead to higher ad budgets that fuel brand growth. So what do I mean by that is, let's say you have a profitable target of, what we saw in this particular case was, let's say the base plan delivered $2.20 ROAS, but the outcomes-based plan exceeded that by $1.10. Well, think of that difference as an annuity, a fund that you've created to be reinvested into the brand. All that extra revenue becomes like a windfall. So you can keep reinvesting that in the brand via larger ad budgets that generate even more growth until a certain point where you'll hit saturation effects. But I do believe that outcomes-based planning will lead to considerably more brand growth because of this final dynamic. So, so at this point, that's what I have to share with all of you. We know we're not at the end of the journey, towards the beginning of the journey, but I'd like to turn it over to Greg and Joanna and to Mark at this point.
Okay, we're gonna switch it off there. We're just 4 minutes over our allocated time. I want to thank all of you who was through right then. Thanks for sharing your time with us, enjoying this collision of ideas amongst our amazing panel, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks so much, guys. Bye.
Thanks, Louisa. Yeah, well done.
Now, by the unholy power invested in me,